you've given the positive aspect of it, that people can connect because they're not too far removed. They might be one generation removed, at best 2 generation removes, but they know somebody who is right dead smack in the epicenter of police brutality. And if not, they still identify by virtue of all the media that we consume. They can see it and they can react. That's from a positive point of view. But in this election, I feel that racial narrative has been used to marginalize a class analysis. And so, and to that extent, that's where I jump off and say, if there's a black group of people who are willing to marginalize a class-based argument using a racial dynamic, then that is extremely poisonous to the plight of the majority of African Americans, who are 28% or 27.4% in poverty, and more than 50% who are below 2 times the poverty level. So talk about that in terms of black neoliberalism and the mobilization of racial politics to the detriment of a class-based analysis.
Well, if you think about kind of the neoliberal term broadly, right, what you got is increased levels of inequality after 1970, right? Mm-hmm. The shape of inequality from 1929 and now takes the shape of a U, right? Really high levels in 1929, really high levels now, and then the dip in between, right? And it goes up around 1970, right? So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the neoliberal term. And there are a number of different elements. Public policy-wise, we see the reduction of the welfare state. We see a series of policies that reduce the ability of cities, states, and federal governments to collect revenue, particularly for progressive purposes. Mm-hmm. We see a series of significant tax cuts designed to redistribute wealth upward. And then there are basically a set of cultural remaking projects where mm-hmm. we seek to remake individuals, institutions, government and non-government, to make them more and more entrepreneurial. So the hustle becomes the thing, where when we were kids, somebody who was hustling was trying to get over. You know, Adolf in your show a couple of days ago talked about the Black Power hustle. Like mm-hmm. hustling was about the getting over. Now the hustling is about a descriptive, right? It's a normative thing. Like, people who are hustling, if you've only got one job and you can manage 2, then you need to have 2. Yeah. And what ends up happening is that ends up generating. That ends up kind of reproducing a modern version of a class project in black communities, where consistently black populations with the wherewithal, with the resources, are kind of reproducing that neoliberal hustling narrative. Whether you're talking about the churches, when you're talking about the growth of the prosperity gospel and figures like Creflo Dollar. And mm-hmm. I have family members that attended prosperity gospel churches, so I kind of know what that's like. If you're talking about school systems, where in cities with large black populations, you see black elites articulating support for charters, for vouchers, and remaking schools so that they operate, school systems so they operate by the metric of competition and quote unquote choice. Right. If you're talking about political officials, you're talking about everybody from mayors like Baltimore Stephanie Rawlings Blake, the hip-hop mayor Kwame Kilpatrick in Detroit, Dennis Hunter Jr., the second black mayor in Detroit, all the way up to Obama, articulating policies that, articulating rhetoric that consistently blames the black poor for their condition, because they don't have the ability to hustle properly. And then consistently, to the extent they're talking about racial dynamics, they're talking about policies that basically benefit a small slice of the black population, and leaving the rest of them basically offending for themselves. So I'll give you just a quick example. I'm the beneficiary of affirmative action. I went to the University of Michigan for my undergraduate and my PhD. Mm-hmm. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a Ward Connerly type proposal in the state of Michigan to basically make it impossible to go to school like Michigan through affirmative action. Mm. It was tailored to the University of Michigan. Wow. And people organized against it as if it were a black thing, right? and it was a black thing in as much as affirmative action is about basically making sure the playing field is open for discriminated folks of color and to a certain extent women. But in a dynamic like that, you look at a city like Detroit, there are only 3 public high schools that routinely sing Kiss the University of Michigan, right? There's Cass, there's Renaissance, and there's King. So there's maybe 24 other high schools that would only send kids to Michigan if they somehow won the lottery, right? So you just take that policy example of affirmative action and move it on. Again, driving while black, right? That's another policy where people are fighting for driving while black laws, and those laws are really geared to benefit people with the money to have nice rides. And then to the extent they're talking about policies geared towards poor and working class populations, they're really policies geared towards rebuilding them, fixing what's wrong with them culturally. Whether you're talking about programs that are designed to help get felons and get them back into the economy, right? Re-entry programs, or you're talking about the Black Boys program, My Brother's Keeper, right? Where the whole thing was about, and that wasn't even a big government program, but the whole thing is basically about fixing boys so they can work in the economy as opposed to dealing with the structural dynamic. Right. So there are people who've been writing books about black politics. There are all types of people who've been writing books about neoliberalism. But what I wanted to do was actually deal with them both, because I didn't know how you could actually talk about black politics, whether and this book is a domestic book. But even broadly, if you extend it to the Caribbean and to some nations in Africa, I didn't know how you could talk about black politics without talking about neoliberalism. So that's kind of what I wanted to do with the book.